The town lay cradled between the hills and the grey Welsh sea, its chimneys breathing thin smoke into the damp morning. The boy, Dylan, walked its cobbled veins as though they were the arteries of a great dreaming creature. Every street had a whisper, every doorway a secret pulse. His shoes were too big, his pockets full of paper scraps, and his head full of words that buzzed like trapped these. He wandered to the cliffs at dawn, where the wind tasted of salt and tin. Below him, the waves folded and unfolded like the pages of a restless book. There he dreamed not of heroes, but of drunks, widows, sailors, of the small people whose laughter echoed through the alleys of his town. He watched the gulls dive and thought they were sentences, dipping and soaring, never quite landing. At home, his mother called him for breakfast in a voice that rose through the mist like a prayer. His father, proud and weary, coughed behind the morning paper. He listened to their silence more than their words. Even their stillness told stories, the rhythm of a life both ordinary and immense. After lessons, he sat in the back of the classroom, sketching faces in his notebook: the postman, the butcher, the girl with braids who smelled faintly of rain. He gave them names that were not their own, invented histories for them, and in the half-light of his imagination they grew flesh and laughter. At night he wrote by candlelight, his sentences uneven but alive, trembling like the flame itself. He did not yet know that he was chasing something vast, not fame, not truth, but the heartbeat of the town, the pulse beneath its cobblestones. Outside his window the tide turned, the sea breathed in its sleep, and the boy, small and burning with wonder, began to write himself into the world. The boy grew restless. The quiet lanes that once cradled his dreams now seemed too narrow, the town too small for the stories swelling in his chest. He began to listen differently, not just to voices, but to the spaces between them. In the pub's smoky hum, in the ticking of the clock above the post office, in the sigh of a milk cart before dawn, he heard the rhythm of something alive, something waiting to be written. He met men who smelled of coal dust and bitter ale, women whose laughter could slice through fog. They spoke to him freely, not knowing the boy was a thief of words. He pocketed their speech, the slant of a curse, the tenderness of a pause, and carried it home like treasure. One evening, he followed the baker's son to a field behind the chapel. There, among the foxgloves and damp stones, they spoke of love and sin in the same breath, their youth crackling like kindling. The sky flared red over the sea, and the boy felt the raw, dangerous pull of wanting, to live, to feel, to write. That night, he filled his notebook with the world as he saw it, crude, holy, ridiculous, and sad. He wrote about his father's tired eyes, his mother's quiet hymn, the town drunk who wept into his pint as though mourning the moon. His words were clumsy but honest, a prayer whispered into the dark. When his teacher found his writing, she frowned, then smiled. "Too much heart," she said, and handed it back. But the boy only grinned, for he knew the heart was the thing, the hot, foolish center of every story worth telling. Outside, the sea began to rise again, pressing against the cliffs with its endless, hungry rhythm. The boy felt the same tide swelling inside him, a storm of words, fierce and bright, that would not be still. The summer came wild and golden, and the boy was no longer only a listener, he was a teller. His words leapt from the page, hot and unsteady, and the town began to feel his gaze upon it. The butcher's laugh, the widow's sigh, the hiss of the tide beneath the pier, he turned them into stories that made people blush, or cry, or laugh in spite of themselves.
But not all laughter was kind. "A poet, is it?" said the baker's son, smirking at the notebook. "Write us a rhyme about the fool who dreams." The boy said nothing, though the sting of the words stayed burning behind his ribs. He learned that truth, when spoken too loudly, could wound the speaker most. Still, he wrote. He wrote because silence felt heavier than sin. In his attic room, beneath the slow swing of the lamp, he poured himself into paper, love and rage and longing spilling from him like seawater through a broken net. The world outside blurred, but the world in his mind grew vast, alive with voices calling through the mist. One night the storm came, rain slashing the glass, the sea roaring like a choir of beasts. The boy went down to the harbor, his notebook clutched against his chest. Lightning lit the sky, and for a heartbeat, the whole town glimmered. The chapel, the tavern, the sleeping streets, a single, breathing poem. He shouted into the wind, words tumbling from him, half prayer, half defiance. "I will write you all," he cried, "every lie, every kiss, every foolish, beautiful thing." The storm swallowed his voice, but he didn't care. For the first time he felt part of something larger than his small, salt-bitten life, a pulse that matched his own. When the thunder eased, he stood trembling and soaked, his heart still beating in the rhythm of the rain. He was not yet a man, not yet a poet, but he was something close, something burning. And as the dawn broke pale and trembling over the sea, the boy walked home, the world newly made inside him.
The morning after the storm, the town shone clean and dazed, as if it had been baptized. The air was sharp with salt and sunlight, the sea still muttering to itself. The boy walked the streets quietly now, his notebook heavy in his pocket, as though it carried not pages, but the weight of all he dared to feel. People greeted him as before, the milkman whistling, the shopkeeper sweeping his step. Yet something had shifted. They spoke softer when he passed, their laughter folded behind hands. He had written himself into their lives, and they both loved and feared the mirror he held up. At home, his father read one of his stories by the fire. "It's clever," he said at last, "but cruel." The boy looked at his shoes, unsure if he'd meant to wound anyone at all. His mother, stirring tea, only smiled. Cruel or kind, the truth is both. The words haunted him. He began to see the ache behind every jest, the tenderness hidden in each quarrel. The town that once seemed a stage now looked more like a prayer, fragile, human, aching to be understood. He walked by the harbor again, where the fishermen mended their nets and the sea breathed its endless sermon. He no longer shouted into the wind. Instead, he listened. The sound of the waves, the rhythm of oars, the low murmur of voices, all of it wove together like lines of unwritten verse. For the first time, he understood that writing was not about conquering the world with words, but surrendering to its music. That night he opened his notebook, but did not write. He watched the candle burn instead, the wax softening, the flame bowing and rising, a living thing that gave itself away just to shine. He smiled faintly. Perhaps that was what a poet was meant to do. Outside, the tide crept back in, slow and certain, washing over the footprints he'd left on the sand. The boy felt the same wash within him, the fierce fire cooling to a steady, lasting glow. The boy is older now, though time in Laregab, that small, whispering town, moves like the tide, more circular than straight. He no longer chases the storm. The sea still murmurs to him, but softly, like a friend who knows when not to speak. The cliffs are the same, the pubs the same, the faces slightly more lined, but full of the same stubborn light. Only the boy's eyes have changed, not in color, but in depth. He spends his mornings by the window above the cobbler's shop, writing while the world below yawns awake. The butcher's bell rings, the milk cart rattles, children shout their crooked songs to the sky. He writes it all down, not as it should be, but as it is, messy, tender, alive. There is no scorn in his pen now, only wonder. Sometimes he walks to the sea's edge at dusk. The wind moves through his hair the way memory moves through thought, unseen yet undeniable. He thinks of the storm years ago, of the boy who screamed at the waves, desperate to be heard. He smiles at that ghost. It was that foolish courage that made him, though he did not know it then. His father has grown frail, his voice now a whisper of smoke. They sit together by the fire, silence wrapping them like a shawl. The boy, no, the man, reads him a story. When he finishes, his father's eyes shine, and he says only, "You found it, haven't you?" The man nods. "Found what?" "The thing you were shouting for." That night, the man walks home under a swollen moon. The town hums softly around him, a hymn of small lives, the same hymn he once tried to outsing. He no longer wants to escape it. He belongs to it, and it to him. At his desk, he writes one last line before blowing out the lamp. The sea is never still, but it always returns. And as darkness folds over Loregub, the man who was once a dreaming boy feels peace. Not the silence of endings, but the quiet of beginnings understood.